Hello, thank you for joining me. I find myself in John chapter 6, verses 1 to 21 today, although I'm actually going to focus on verses 1 to 15 in chapter 6, which recounts the episode of Jesus feeding the 5,000. I think the only miracle that's recorded in all of each of the Gospels. And this passage always takes me back to my own childhood. And it makes me think about the way Jesus' miracles are presented to children. And it makes me think particularly of the Ladybird book, which I must have had or seen. Wonderful things, of course. Typically each pair of pages has a picture and then some text. And as I remember, this one, it must have been a Ladybird book, I think, each double page recounted a miracle. And it's interesting, isn't it, as children, because you can be on a spectrum anywhere from thinking, oh wow, that's amazing, that's what happened, to no, that can't have happened. And maybe as adults as well, we continue somewhere on that spectrum. But they're such complex passages, this one maybe particularly, in terms of what we take from them and what we read into them. So I'll read the passage, John chapter 6, verses 1 to 15. After this, Jesus went across Lake Galilee. A large crowd followed him because they had seen his miracles of healing those who were ill. Jesus went up a hill and sat down with his disciples. The time for the Passover festival was near. Jesus looked round and saw that a large crowd was coming to him. So he asked Philip, "Where can we buy enough food to feed all these people?" He said this to test Philip. Actually, he already knew what he would do. Philip answered, "For everyone to have even a little, it would take more than 200 silver coins to buy enough bread." Another of his disciples, Andrew, who was Simon Peter's brother, said, "There is a boy here who has 5 loaves of barley bread and 2 fish, but they will certainly not be enough for all these people." "Make the people sit down," Jesus told them. There was a lot of grass there. So all the people sat down, and there were about 5,000 men. Jesus took the bread, gave thanks to God, and distributed it to the people who were sitting there. He did the same with the fish. And they all had as much as they wanted. When they were all full, he said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces left over, let us not waste any." So they gathered them all up and filled 12 baskets with the pieces left over from the 5 barley loaves which the people had eaten. Seeing this miracle that Jesus had performed, the people there said, "Surely this is the prophet who has come into the world." Jesus knew that they were about to come and seize him in order to make him king by force, so he went off to the hills by himself. So there we are, Jesus feeding the 5,000. And I can also remember as a child very often this passage would be used to draw, really important ideas from the idea that less can be more. When faith is in the picture and Jesus is there, less is more, and the virtue of sharing and so on. And these are really powerful messages that we find in here. But when I look at it, it always makes me feel for Jesus in a way, because it's all about who he is, isn't it? And about how people perceive him. And the fact that this is, as we're told in verse 4, the time for the Passover festival was near. There are all sorts of parallels, aren't there, potentially, or perceived parallels with Jesus and Moses and people's perceptions of who they were relative to each other. And I think that's what Jesus is struggling with, really. I mean, towards the end of the passage here in verse 15, Jesus knew that they were about to come and seize him in order to make him king by force. So he went off again to the hills by himself. And it's interesting to reflect on why Jesus performed this miracle. I mean, presumably these people wouldn't have starved if he hadn't done it. They'd have probably gone home and had something to eat, wouldn't they? So it's not about that, is it? It's about him and how people perceive him. There might be some parallels with Moses and the manna from heaven and so on. But the real critical difference that perhaps doesn't, people just don't get, is that while Moses had interactions with God, the theophanous experiences, Jesus actually was and is God. So the miracle itself, if you like, people are seeing God, and it's that I think that Jesus is challenged by, because if people just see Jesus somebody who's come there to solve their problems, Jesus knew that they were about to come and seize him in order to make him king by force. And this is the problem Jesus has, I think, all the way through to the crucifixion, isn't it? Is what people think he's there for. And that's something that we can still really, I think, usefully reflect on today. When we call on our faith, when we pray, do we expect Jesus to do things for all sorts of thing, and to be our champion in a worldly sense? And do we actually see that Jesus is God? So Jesus feeds the 5,000, and such a powerful passage. Thanks for joining me.